Okay, I think we're ready to go. I need to make sure that Forrest and Monte are reassigned as co-hosts. Co-hosts. Boy, I don't. Oh, here we go. Apparently, Monte already is, and here we go.
Yeah, I've been left out. Yeah. Oh, good. I'm back on salary now. Okay.
Right. Thank you both, Monte and Forrest, for helping us out in this way. It's really, really very helpful. Okay, Forrest.
All right. Usually at this time you have comments about the first part of the presentation, but in lieu of today, I guess we'll just go right on to the questions. And Eduardo, I've got you up here, number one.
David actually was not a comment on the class, but for the first time I experienced today, the other Sabbath school class had both Zoom class and live class. They have a TV on the room where many people gathered together. I remember you mentioned that you're gonna try both Zoom and live stream. Are you planning to do it?
Yeah, yes, we are.
Where did you see this happen?
Sligo Church.
Sligo, okay. And did it work well?
I think so. People were coming into the room. You can see them coming into the room of the church building.
Okay.
Yeah, I do, David.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I talked to Malin and he's had some problems over there trying to do both. So it's not just a slam dunk. So we'll have to work on that though.
Well, I'm glad to hear it went well at Sligo because I was talking to both Chuck Sandifer and a man named David Hooker, who does their technology work for the Sabbath school class there at Sligo. And I knew they were going to try something today. That is, they were going to use the camera from the computers and also cameras from smartphones and see if that would work. And I'm happy to hear from you, Eduardo, that it seems to be working. So we'll try something similar. Go ahead.
On the lesson, to be a chosen is to be a chosen for a mission. Not to discriminate others, but to try to reach others. And I like your statements on the class about the covenant that many people misunderstand. That's my comment.
Well, thank you. Just to back step just a little bit. Forrest mentioned that Malin Kutsi has reported some struggle with this on the campus. One difference is that I have been, this is crazy, I have been voted emeritus professor, which means that I get back on email, get back on the internet and so forth and so on, get a parking place. And so this is going to make it possible for me to get on the school's main internet system rather than the one they provide for guests, which is not as fulsome as the one for the university. So I think we're going to be able to surmount the issues Malin Kutsi reports. Now, I do appreciate your support on this, Eduardo. I do think that it's a very serious matter, how we understand the covenant or the covenants. And I do think that Adventists do well to keep them together and not to be afraid of be called Judaizers or Hebrew Christians or whatever. The biggest danger in the Christian history is not being too solicitous to the Jewish religion, but being too criminal toward it. So, thanks.
Okay, I have Robert Ford. He's written something in the message, but I'm going to tell him to ask it right to you directly. Robert, go ahead.
Just was going to ask if you could tell me a little bit more about Steve Daly. Do you know what years he was at the academy? We know which academy we're talking about. And where is he a chaplain? I must admit, I don't know as much about him. Has he created a kind of a separate Adventist fellowship? Can you, I don't know how much you want to share, but maybe a little bit more on his background so we could understand it a little bit more.
Okay. My understanding is that he went to the same boarding school that you and I did, which is Rio Lindo Academy, but that he did so a number of years later, maybe quite a few years later. I hate to admit how much younger he might be than I am, but his experience there did not at all parallel my experience there. I actually, on balance, had a good experience there. I did not return for more than 1 year for personal reasons. The main one was I didn't want to stay in high school for 4 years. And Rio Lindo didn't have a way to get me out of there in 3, but PUC Prep did. So I shifted. But that doesn't mean anything all that negative about the school. I am just puzzled by how people on that campus could be as unhelpful as he reports them to have been, because I did not experience that when I was there, though it was a number of years earlier. I don't know where he went to college. He did an MA at La Sierra in history, and he studied the 1919 General Conference sessions, I think. But then he was the chaplain on the Loma Linda, he was a chaplain on the La Sierra campus of Loma Linda University for many years. And that's where I had acquaintance with him. I cannot claim to be a friend in any close sense, but I can claim to have been a colleague and an acquaintance and to have respected him. He, as I've said, was a little more inclined toward charismatic Christianity than I am, but that's okay. But then from there, he became the pastor of the Celebration Church in the Inland Empire. I never went to it, so I don't really know where it was. But my understanding is that it swarmed from the Azure Hills Church for those who were more interested in a charismatic form of Adventism. And he was the pastor there for a number of years. Now, that was his last denominational assignment. And why it concluded at that point is not altogether clear to me. My impression in such cases is that it's usually a combination of somebody jumping out and being pushed out, some combination of the two, and I would anticipate that it's that. He had studied at Claremont in social ethics and in church history, and had gotten a doctorate there, but then he also did a doctorate in psychology down at some school in San Diego. So when he concluded his ministry at the Celebration Church, in due course, I don't know how long it took, but he became an addiction counselor down at UCLA and was there, I think, for 10 years. Which strikes me as interesting because I think he's harder on Ellen White than most addiction counselors would be. One of the things he faults Ellen White for is being addicted to alcohol. And he cites her recording her struggle with using excessive amounts of a particular kind of vinegar, which Steve says had a high alcohol, might have had a high alcohol content. But this puzzles me. First of all, I don't know what alcohol content there was in that vinegar. Secondly, she's very clear about having had this struggle and having wrestled with her habit on this. And after much struggle and prayer and support by others, she overcame it. Now, I would think that an addiction counselor would applaud that. I mean, that's what addiction counselors try to foster. But I don't get the impression that he applauds Ellen White for that, but rather he condemns her for that. And I don't understand that. Why would an addiction counselor be so hard on Ellen White if she had a destructive habit over which she struggled and finally became victorious? I don't get it. Anyway.
Yes, good. That'd be helpful. You know, it points out to me, you mentioned in your presentation kind of the different phases that you can see in Steve Daly's own life, where he starts out, very supportive. And what's interesting to me is that, I see that in some of my own friends. I see that in family. This is kind of the human condition. We go through phases, we change, we grow. And I don't find it surprising that if we go back and study Ellen G. White, we find out that she was a real person. She had real struggles. She had inspiration. She was a leader. But so I liked your expressing it, that we accept a lot, but not absolutely. We need to have a little bit of humility about understanding the past. And realize that we're dealing with human frailty. And even Helen G. White had her frailty. So I appreciate that, you bringing that out today.
Well, thanks, Bob. You and I went to the same academy, and we both had good experiences there. We both made lifelong friendships there. I think I got a good education there. I remember how in the algebra class, Mr. Reed would arrange us in a sequence according to how well we were doing. Just like in an orchestra, you have first violin, second violin, third violin, and so forth. And the top person in algebra got the best seat, and the worst person in algebra got the last seat. I wasn't sure if that kind of social pressure was a helpful thing, but it sure motivated us to study algebra.
That's good. Well, thank you, Dave. Yeah.
Yeah. I knew nothing about Ellen White's struggle with this form of alcohol, but when I read, the only thing I know about it is what I read in Steve Daly's book, which is quite critical of her. But I had exactly the opposite impression, even from his negative assessment of it. That is, she got herself caught, apparently, in an excessive use of a therapeutic remedy. How often does that happen? Many, many times. We know that. And she was open about it. She was struggling over it. And she asked people for their support. And in time, she says she became victorious over it. I say 3 cheers for Ellen White.
Thank you. One other quick question. Right at the end of Steve Daly's book, at the 5th phase, you say that he thinks that she is or became a narcissistic psychopath. That sounds kind of strange to me, coming from someone who's an addiction counselor and trained in psychology, because many famous people and presidents and kings and whatever have had problems with narcissism, but to cross over from narcissism of a more common kind to this extreme form of narcissism, why would he accuse her of that?
Well, he lists, the features of these maladies from abnormal psychology, and then he puts them on another column, her features of her life. And he's very careful to say, I am observing the Goldwater rule, which is a rule that says psychologists and psychiatrists should not diagnose people they have never met in person. So he said, I'm not going to do that. But he lays things out so clearly and so much in one direction that it is evident that he wants the reader to come to these conclusions. Well, I don't know what to make of that. Monte has written, if she was so open about these things, why didn't I know about it? I don't know why I didn't know about it. That's a good question, Monte. I feel like I should have been more alert. My guess is that this is in her letters, more so. It's not in her published writings. I'm sure of that because I've read, I think, them all. Maybe not. Anyway, but what's happened is that the Ellen White estate has put virtually everything it has on the internet. It has not put her handwritten manuscripts on the internet, and I hope that in some time in the future it will. But this allows people from all over the world to examine things that were not previously accessible to them. And I suppose that it was in combing through that material that Steve found out about this. But I don't know why I didn't know. There's so many things I don't know, Monte. This is one of them.
Well,
Dave,
David,
can I
if
say
I
something?
if I could enter into, oh, go ahead. Down here, is it Laveling, Ellie? I was gonna say, David, been my experience going back 50 years now with this, doesn't seem possible. But you know, there's a lot of things that the White Estate did not come out for years until people like Ron Grable started to bring it out and run numbers. And, you know, even as late as 20 years ago, I didn't know about W.W. Prescott's letter to Willie and Ellen. So it's just, you know, they've been forced to come out with stuff that they've been hiding for years, in my estimation.
Yeah,
Well, I think that is true, and I think it's sad. I think the Ellen White estate should be out front and first in getting this material out to the people. And there is some hesitancy now to put out her handwritten material, which Ron Grable calls the last secret of the Ellen White estate. My view is let's get rid of that secret too and put all those handwritten documents on the internet and see how she crossed things out, how she added things, how other people affected her writings. And I think that there will be a wave of negative reactions to this, but in time, things will settle down and we will be further ahead than we are at the present. As you've said, Forrest, we are incrementally, it seems as though we are incrementally compelled to release more and more. Now, I don't know if Ted Lefterov is on still.
Yeah, he is. Ted's
Well,
on.
I'd like to get Ted to jump in here. Also, I've been asked to see what Dr. Cupino thinks about Ellen White psychology, if he has had a chance to think about that. So those are two things on the future. Now, if I can continue just a little bit, none of us is responsible for what Ellen White did. I don't have any objection to her using literary sources. I don't have any objection to her benefiting from much editorial help. What I do find puzzling is that she denied both of these. That for me is very troubling. Now there may be, it might be that if I lived in her time and place, that I would be able to find justification for what she did. All I can say is that from my standpoint, it's regrettable that she was not at all candid about her use of literary sources and her benefit from editorial assistance. Now, what can we do about it? We're not responsible for what she did, but we are responsible for what we do with what she did. And I think the White Estate should be out front in listing, maybe on a website called Ellen White Sources and Resources, listing the documents that she used and giving credit to the people who gave her editorial assistance. Let's get right out front and deal with that candidly and openly and get it over with, rather than trying to keep this secret as long as we possibly can.
Okay, David, did you want me to go to some of our questioners, or did you want to go to Ted or Dr. Cupino?
Well, I don't know if Ted and Dr. Lefterov and Dr. Cupino are willing to talk. I would like them to, but let's not force them.
Okay.
Let's go to others first.
Sure,
Okay.
let me make a comment first.
Okay, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Okay, a few things here. I mean, there's so many questions, David, that you raised. I mean, we need a few weeks to discuss them. But on the issue of vinegar, right?
Yes.
It's
What
a
happened?
matter of interpretation. Now, the fact that some of you have not heard it, I mean, go and read the book Counsels to Diet and Food, published, I think, in the 43 or something like that, 1940s. It's a compilation, but it's all there. So nobody has hid it. Now, the interpretation, it's very funny if you read, you know, this anti-Ellen White sites. So it's all matter of interpretation, and you can make your own mind. Okay, but it's all out there in the books. I know it comes from letters, from manuscripts, but it's actually in the compilations. So go and check
Okay.
out the book, Counsels on Diet and Food, and I don't know the page number, but if I check it, I can give it to
Okay.
you, okay? So it's right there. Plagiarism. I mean, we have been on this many times.
Yes.
There was even the White Estate hired even a whole firm. They paid thousands of dollars to study the issue of plagiarism in the 19th century. And the understanding was very different from what we have today. I mean, it really came in the 1980s, we think. Well, it came in the 1850s for the very first time. And nobody, you know, heard about it or tried to maneuver it and so forth, including Ellen White, because they even didn't consider that this is plagiarism. So let me give you an example. If you read, I'm a Bulgarian, if you read a Bulgarian book, scientific or theological, before 1989, you will see a lot of quotations, but you will not see people giving credit to the authors, okay? Including some of the Adventist publications. So it's very difficult to find where this came from. It was just nobody considered that to be legal or plagiarism. So I go to England. I spent 2-3 years working, studying the language. I begin my very first class called English composition. They teach you how to write, okay? And I write a wonderful 6 pages paper, citing some things without giving credit. Now, Mrs. Mary Trim, my teacher, okay, David Trim from the GC Moms, gets me into her office and she gives me a big red F. And I mean, she's talking to me about plagiarism. I have no idea what it means, okay? And we began to discuss, and then it dawned on me that, I mean, this is something serious, okay? So, I mean, she gave me the opportunity to rewrite and give the proper credit. So, you know, there are a lot of other issues there related to 19th century and so forth. In fact, the first person who used the word plagiarism, D.M. Conrad, right? Check out his books. If we are going to accuse Ellen White of plagiarism, I mean, he was much more percentage-wise plagiarizing than her. You see? So, I mean, we can debate and say and this and that, but people had different issues. Now, this is not to excuse. I mean, once people began to raise the issue, even Ellen White said, okay, let's put whatever you guys want in the book Great Controversy, and that's why they republished it into 1911. So I'm not trying to be apologetical, okay? I'm the least one. David knows that I admit that Ellen White did a lot of mistakes as any human, right? But if you compare her to David or Moses, probably much better. So on Steve Daly's book, I think that if I have to make a conclusion on Steve Daly's book, it's he may need a psychoanalysis of himself, okay? Because of what he does with all the material that it's, I mean, everything is known. He's basically repeating things, but 99.9% of all the resources that he used are anti-Ellen White resources. Go and check out. I mean, he quotes only once in a footnote, the E.G. White Encyclopedia. I mean, it is a work for 14 years. Now, you may not agree with every article and stuff like that, but you need to be aware of that and give more credit to the historical research that has been done. And so he uses Ron Numbers and, you know, Walter Ray's book extensively and so forth. So he has missed a lot of contemporary research and studies that have been done on Ellen White, answering a lot of these questions. But basically what he does is a mere repetition. And David asked, what question would you ask him? I tend to begin with the question of presuppositions. We should be aware of our presuppositions. And I had a huge, not an argument because I'm friends with Ron Numbers, but he claimed when they published the book Ellen G. White, the American Prophetess, right, that it's the first unbiased book. Well, I convinced him otherwise, so he admitted that. I mean, okay, it's a little bit biased. He said, well, but I'm biased that much and you're biased that much. Okay, but you're still biased that much. So I think that the question of presuppositions, we have to be aware of that. And once you have presuppositions, you go and you try to find things that you agree with. And I think that that's what you see in the book of Steve Daly. I mean, I'm speaking in a very general sense, okay? And that's why he comes to such conclusions. I mean, you're looking for these conclusions, okay? You're not doing psychoanalysis or research, as David pointed some of the flaws. So there's a lot of things. I mean, I can continue on, but I'll stop here. So, but yeah, go. I think that I have a seminar. I call it Ellen White and the Chocolate Experience. Okay, and I tell people Ellen White and the Chocolate Experience. The chocolate.
So when are you going to present that to us?
I'll present it sometime in the future. But basically, this is what I tell people. You guys read much more what is the internet than Ellen White herself. So go and begin and read Ellen White and make your own conclusions about her, okay? It's very easy to read about Ellen White. Go and read Ellen White. You know, begin a plan. You may disagree. I mean, she's the biggest fraud or whatever she did, okay? I mean, such a terrible person. But go and read her. Begin with her writings, okay? And then go and investigate and read some of what people think and study and research and so forth. And I think that that's a good approach. It's very easy for me to talk to you, do a seminar about the Swiss chocolate, okay? I can tell you the ingredients. I can tell you that it's much better than the American chocolate. All right? And I'll give you a whole lecture with PowerPoints, how they do it and what temperature they use and how much sugar and cacao and so forth. And you will get some idea. But if I give you to taste the chocolate, okay, you may really then see if I'm right or wrong. It's the same with Ellen White. You see the point? So instead of talking, I suggest to all people here, well, we need to go back and read her first. And then do a psychoanalysis and read all the, you know, literature about her. Anyway, thank you.
Okay. Thank you,
Ted. I find this very helpful. I'm looking forward to your presentation. So let's get together with your schedule open and we'll try to put this on the calendar. I would like to just respond in one way, and that is to say, I am interested not only in what she took from these other people, but what she excluded and changed, because there is a remarkable theological coherence over the whole body of her work. And clearly she was impressing that theological paradigm on this material, and I'd like to see how that all worked out. So I think the first step in textual criticism is to notice the differences. I mean, yeah, to notice the sameness, but the second step is to notice the differences. And I think we have not yet taken that step in the analysis of Ellen White. But I really appreciate what you said, Ted. Let's keep talking.
Okay, I want to go to Rod Corker at this time. He's had his hand up. His hand's probably tired by now, but Rodney, to you.
Firstly, Dave, you were excellent this morning, just outstanding in terms of setting this up, positioning. How we position ourselves on these matters really determines what we end up believing in terms of the detail. So I want to thank you for spending so much time in carefully crafting the positioning of this discussion. Within myself and my own reflections, I do see a danger in my education, my disposition there. And I think it would apply to many of us because we were schooled in reductionism, segmentation, stratification, identity politics, progressivism, replacement theory. You see, this is the environment, the culture that us academics live in. But when our God, and that I think plays into how we see an old covenant, a new covenant. It's part of reductionism and divisionism. And that's a danger that I face. So I like that higher positioning that you put in front of us. And in my own readings, when I read Mesopotamian history and the arrival of Yahweh, or more correctly, as Bernard Taylor would say, Yeshua, he presented himself as the one true universal God. He really went unchallenged. He was a universal God. And any way you look at it, that can be seen as a master stroke in a master positioning. But the one thing that he did as the universal God also made a universal promise. That's very important to me. And he said, I will never leave you. Yes, things will change. Things won't go well. You will adapt. I will adapt. But I will promise you this, I will never leave you. And that's why I can worship that God. And I think that's very important to me. So the next thing would be your positioning, which is really important when it comes to beliefs have to be reasoned. I mean, Reinda Brunsma emphasized this. You've always emphasized this. Things have to make sense. So in our overall approach, we must not put aside reasoned beliefs. And that's part of why, as you've presented, I do not do textual referencing. I do not bunch and gather text. I think that is something that has hurt us badly in the past. And so just overall to finish with a disposition of humility, openness, avoiding the extreme margins, continuing to talk, read, discussion, and think. Thank you, David.
Well, thank you, Rodney. I really appreciate your support and also your exploration of the meaning, the full meaning of monotheism and how the one universal God entails, doesn't imply, it's stronger than that. It entails the idea of one universal promise for all people. And I'm going to have to get with you to schedule you on board because you haven't done anything for a year. So you owe us something, Rodney. Okay, Forrest.
Okay, do you have more to say, Rodney? Okay.
No, thank you, Forrest. That's my time. Appreciate it. Move on.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like to go to, is it L.A. Velling? Is that L. Eveling? I'm sorry, I don't know how those letters go. You have a question?
Lee Aveling. Thanks, Forrest.
I'm sorry, it's what?
It's Lee Aveling.
Lee Aveling. Okay.
Yes.
Good enough. Okay, Lee, go ahead.
I had the privilege of some years of working at the Behavior Medicine Center in the addiction unit. And I'm going back to previous conversation, I think came from Dave about normally when you work with so-called addicts, you applaud their strength, because giving up an addiction, is very challenging for a lot of people, and so I'm kind of troubled that Steve would kind of go back and, talk about her addiction, which she apparently did overcome. The second thing is I have the privilege of being a licensed marriage and family therapist, which is very different to a psychologist, but we still study much of the same material. And to globalize her pathologies is very troubling. I think most of us, if we go back over our lives, Paul said, when I was a child, as fake as a child, and that's ongoing, as we get more information. To say that, she is this diagnosis, for instance, narcissism, the DSM-5 doesn't include narcissism as a disorder anymore, because I guess so many of us have it. And I'm just kidding, but I don't know. But, some of these, I don't know when Steve published his book, but some of, the same with, he uses a word, which the current word is sociopath, which is basically a person who doesn't have a conscience. I grew up reading the Conflict of the Ages series. When I was in academy, we had enforced, silence for 15 minutes in the morning and the evening. And I took the opportunity to go through those books, the Conflict of the Ages. And I found it so fulfilling and blessing, in terms of just what she said about Jesus. It drew me closer to him. So I'm troubled that somebody would globalize once again, and also not, if somebody was an addict, not applaud the strength of overcoming. Thanks.
Thank you, Lee. It's good to see and hear from you. And I appreciate your insights from addiction counseling and from marriage and family therapy. We need to bring to bear all these different specialties as we think through these matters. And I appreciate what you're doing. Thanks a lot. Good to see you.
Thanks.
Okay, I would like to go to, can I say Dr. Cupino peeking around the corner? Did you want to comment on some of
Yes.
these issues? Okay,
Yes.
Dr. Cupino is you're a psychiatrist, correct?
Yes, I'm a psychiatrist. I've practiced 30 years. I've been double boarded in my specialty and subspecialty. I've been hauled to court to offer opinions. I can tell you now, it's very difficult to come up with a diagnosis of narcissistic without going through in-depth evaluation. It's very easy to go to Google and get the criteria, but that's not how we diagnose a narcissistic or personality disorders. I'd like to be present when Mr. Daly comes on board to ask him, how did he coming up with a diagnosis?
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You want to respond to that, David, or?
Dr. Cupino's comment.
Oops.
I missed that.
Yeah, David, you're stuttering a little bit here.
Maybe his internet or something.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you gotta pay his bill. David, are you? Okay, I don't know. Bronwyn, are you listening? Can you hear okay on yours, or?
David went frozen.
Yeah.
Yes, I can hear fine,
Well,
but I can.
I appreciate what Peter's saying. Forrest, let's move forward.
Uh-oh.
We're having problems still with you, David.
Maybe he can switch or
Yeah.
go off and come back. So that,
Yeah. Isn't that what he just tried, I think? Yeah. And thank you, Dr. Cupino. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that was interesting what you said, and that there's no way to analyze somebody unless you're actually with that individual.
Well, you can do a mental status examination for time one, but that's not how we do it. We do a series of times. Personality disorders are rigid and stable, and normally they come and emerge during late adolescence, which means you have to document. Even then, you have to document the disturbances caused on 3 domains. So if you only focus on one domain, it's very easy to do those things, but they won't stand in court.
Yeah, okay. David, are you back on with us now?
David, you need to unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
We can hear you now, David. Thank
Yes,
you.
yes.
Okay, I just want to say I appreciate Dr. Cupino's comments, and we need to hear from him more fully.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, David.
Okay. Got to make sure we let people know when Dr. Daly is going to be here to speak to us so that others can
Right.
plan their schedule. Okay. I would like to go to Sue Lewis now. Sue.
David, I was thinking with Steve Daly, does he use the word covenant, Old and New Covenant, in correlation with Old and New Testament? I mean, I know the word testament means covenant, but I don't know, it seems like some Christians do that, and I just wondered if that's how he sees it, if you know from his book.
Now, I looked and tried to find things that he himself had written on this, and I have failed, and so I need to learn more from him when he's with us. I read the material that people who make that distinction follow. Now, there are people who make 7 covenants, right? Like the dispensationalists do. So they would not equate any one covenant with the Old Testament or with the New Testament. But it is my impression that those who divided the covenants into only 2 do equate them with the First and Second Testaments. But I'm willing to be corrected by Steve on that, but that is my impression.
Okay. Thank you. Peter. Should be good to go, Peter.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, David, for your presentation. I'd like to talk about 2 things. First, my experience in archives and special collections at Loma Linda. That was before Ted was there. I started my work as part-time in special collections, working with Ellen White's letters and manuscripts, and half-time in archives. And then I became full-time the head of archives. When I was working in special collections, I have to say that my experience is not something that Dave mentioned, that it was a kind of secrecy, and Ellen White didn't give full access to everything that Ellen White wrote. It was, though, something that produced maybe this belief that Ellen White is White Estate is hiding some things from the view of the public. It was a file that was called Z file. The Z file included, if I recall correctly, about 5 letters. And on these 5 letters, didn't everybody has access, it was just special permission. And maybe like everybody else, I was curious to see what is in this Z file that it was not permitted access to all researchers. And I was very surprised to find that these 5 letters were very personal letters. And that was the reason basically from not giving access to all people to these letters. And let me mention one of these letters, what was in it. In this letter, personal letter, Ellen White was talking about a pastor in San Francisco, a pastor of the church that was, one of his church was in San Francisco. And when he was visiting this church, the lady used to wash his feet. Then Ellen White was criticizing this for doing this kind of things. And I can say that was nothing mysterious in this Z file, as I mentioned, the letter that I was mentioning. Second thing that I want to mention is in your comment, in your presentation, David, you mentioned Professor Rubinstein, a Jewish scholar that made the statement, a kind of surprising statement about the covenant. That is the worst thing that existed. Well, maybe he was referring to the fact that for the Jews, it was not very positive because it created the idea that they were special people, better than all other people on the face of the earth. And I was very surprised to find in their liturgy that they're mentioning that you have made us special, not like other people. And they still believe that. And of course, this is not a very positive fact. But also, Dr. Rubinstein mentioned that the Israeli state will do better to do more for the people living in that area. Well, looking at the historical facts, I should not agree with him exactly. Because looking at the history, in 1948, when the General Assembly approved that in Palestine will be two states, Palestinian state and the Jewish state, the Palestinians, the Arabs, in other words, didn't agree with that. They started a war against Israel. And they were defeated. I have to mention that in the state of Israel, at this time are living approximately 4 million of Arabs in a population of approximately 9 million people in the state of Israel. And these Arabs living in Israel have large privileges. They have a political party. This political party is representing in the Jewish Knesset parliament. And right at this present time, this party, this Arab party, is part of the coalition that toppled Benjamin Netanyahu, that was the prime minister for many years. Then they have large privileges. They don't serve in the military, but they have a lot of privileges like in a democratic state. I'm not saying that maybe they were even giving more privileges, but that the state of Israel is a democratic state and it's giving large privileges to the Arabs living in this state.
Well, Peter, I appreciate both of your comments. One about the Z file. You've been there, you've looked at it, you've read what's in that Z file. And so what you have to say about that is very, very helpful. Also that your experience is that the white estate is not being overly secretive, I think is a good corrective to the impression that many of us have and the impression that I have left. So thank you for that. On the issue of Israel and Palestine, I just find it very, very interesting and complex. I for a long time, not for a long time, but for a while, I communicated with a rabbi called Jacob Neusner, he said. I think in Germany they would say Neusner. But anyway, he felt like the Christians were unbalanced in their support of the Palestinians. And particularly the progressive or liberal Christians. And so I listened to that very carefully. And I've listened to Norma Nashad very carefully because she pushes back against the idea that the Israelis are unilateral oppressors. So I'm trying to learn from everybody on this. But it does seem to me that it's not right for the Israelis to bulldoze down the homes of Palestinians as they expand the borders of their nation. That does bother me. Do you want to comment on that at all?
You're muted, Peter. There you go.
Okay, yes, I'm not saying that Israelis are perfect in their approach to in their relationship with the Palestinians. What you were referring to, demolition of their buildings, it's connected to the terrorists, those that are committing terrorist acts. And of course, it's like Lex Talionis law that was in existence in Israel. You are doing something bad against me, I will do something bad against you. I'm not saying that this is very good, but it's a way to respond to terrorist acts. I mean, blowing up buses full of people and children and that are not guilty of all, and committing this terrorist act is not something very good also.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter. Thank you.
What about the fact that they started sending hundreds of rockets, over approximately 500 of them, without being unprovoked? There are balloons that are exploding in Israel and producing damages to the farms and killing people and doing other kind of damages. The thing is, the relationship is much more complex than it's the first sight.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
David, I have two people who have hands up, but they've asked questions already. I don't know what time frame you want us to stay with. It's 1:45 now, or actually it's 10 minutes to, so counsel me.
Can we take these next two and then call it quits?
We'll do that. We'll do that. All right, Eduardo.
David, can you share with me the evidence for your assessment that she denied the use of literature and the influence of others, so I can compare with my notes? I'm afraid that you don't have enough evidence to support your assessment. Can you share with me those sources?
Okay, let me get something to you after this, but I think it's widely agreed that she was not altogether forthcoming about this. I don't know that that's a matter of dispute, but for instance, let me just mention one book, Herb Douglas's book on her, the great big fat textbook on her, on Ellen White, written by Herbert Douglas, Dr. Herbert Douglas, says that she was not very disclosed, that he explains it out of her fear of being misunderstood and not taken seriously as a messenger of the Lord. Now, I think he has provided an explanation. I don't think he has provided an excuse satisfactory to us today. Now we need to keep into account Ted's comment. I know, for instance, though I'll have to look it up again, that I was once surprised by reading in ancient, by that I mean 1848, I believe, version of the Code of the American Medical Association, and recognizing that big chunks of it had been lifted from Percival's Medical Ethics that had been published some time ago without attribution. So that sort of thing did happen, and I am not prepared to condemn people for doing that. I just wish that at this time, we would be as candid as we possibly could be about what we know her sources were and what we know her literary assistants were.
And David, quickly. Willie White have an article about the visions of Ellen G. White. I can send it to you. He explained very masterly done about the visions of Ellen G. White. I'm afraid that you are learning from Herbert Douglass and some other professors, but I would like to have your own original sources rather than the teachings of others.
The best I can do for you offhand is Dr. Herbert Douglass's book on Ellen White, which was authorized by the White estate. Then beyond that, I don't have anything offhand to share with you, but I take seriously your suggestion that my sources aren't the best sources, and I'd be happy to read whatever you send me.
Okay. All right, David, I'd like to go to Sue Lewis, will be our last questioner of the day. Sue.
Oh, before I ask my question, could I ask if I could get copies of the quotes from both of you too? I would love to have them. If I email David, could I get copies?
Did you hear that, David?
I don't know what Eduardo had, but the best I can do is to suggest that one read Herbert Douglass's book on Ellen White. It's the most comprehensive book of her that's been authorized by the most positive account of what happened. And he says that to credits where they were, and he tries to explain why, and I should not say tries, he explains why he thinks it did not happen in her time, all of which I'm willing to accept. I just think that we now should be as disclosive as we possibly can be. That's what I think. We can't do anything about that, but we can be as disclosive as we possibly can be. And I think seeing how she changed things, as well as seeing how she used things, would be good. She did not adopt things, she adapted them. And there's a big difference. And how she adapted them, I think, is worthy of careful study. But that's all I can suggest offhand, and that is Dr. Douglass's book.
Okay, David, oh no, Sue, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I wonder, this adopting versus adapting, I wonder too, sometimes if it's a question of definitions about, I didn't borrow from any sources. Well, is she talking about borrow my original idea about what I want to say? I might have used descriptions from other sources, but the idea about what I wanted to convey was not from them. I don't know. I don't know enough about it. I want to learn more about it. Anyway, my question was the opinion versus certain opinions just don't make any sense. When you read Ellen White and you thought, okay, well, that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't bother me. I was recently reading something last week and I thought, oh, I just cannot agree with that, And I thought, was that her opinion or was that something that was inspired, by God that she wanted to relate to the church? because I can't imagine God being upset about what she was upset about. And so I thought, I was hoping Ted Levterov was still here, but how do we determine what's inspired and what's not? Just because of the fact, well, that looks like it had to be inside information, so that must have been inspired. No other way she could have known that, and the rest could be just her opinion. I mean, do you have any ideas about that?
It's a way of framing the issue that his word included was inspired. We would take it as truth, even though it contradicts everything we otherwise know. I don't think so. I think so. The question for me is not whether what she said in some instance was inspired, but whether what she said in that case is of value and validity today. Now, I don't think we should go through and just throw away stuff that she said. I think we should put it on the shelf and validates or invalidates what she said on that particular matter. But unless it makes sense, all things considered, I don't think we should be swift to implement it in our own lives and be swift to condemn other people for not implementing it in their own lives. So is it inspired or not inspired? I don't know how to make progress on that by asking the question that way. I think the way to make progress is to ask, does this statement make sense, all things considered, as we know the evidence now? Maybe in time she will be proven to be right, but as we know the evidence now, some things don't add up, and therefore we should put them on the shelf and see what happens over time.
Okay, David, we are at the bewitching hour now, so I'm going to thank you very much for your presentation. And thank you so much.
There's the benediction. And everybody come forth with things to be shared, okay? The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.
Thank you, David.
Thanks, David. Enjoyed the presentation very much.
Yeah, this was very helpful.